Welcome to Never Mind the Ballot Election Countdown. I'm Jack Elsom, and there's now just 20 days to go until the nation hits the polls. Joining me today to look back at a manic week of manifestos, TV debates and leader interviews is The Sun's political correspondent, Martina Bett. But first, let's look at some of the key moments from last night's seven-way leaders debate on ITV. Martina, it was a pretty scrappy affair last night. Some of the big bust-ups between Penny Mordaunt and Nigel Farage after that pretty shock poll dropped just moments before. Let's have a look at some of that.
I'd like to ask Penny, would you allow Nigel Farage into the Tory party?
You might think I have a lot in common with Nigel, but what I'm standing against is letting you in and letting you tax the hell out of people. Nigel is helping you do that. So I think we've probably got less in common than you might imagine.
It's this sort of arm wrestle now, really, isn't it, about who is the main opposition to Labour? Is it the Tories? Is it Reform? What do you think?
Well, Nigel Farage, of course, yesterday, as soon as the programme started, immediately said, we are the true opposition. We've got this poll right now. We're proving it to you. We are the real opposition to Labour. And, I mean, all the leaders last night, they already said Labour's winning. Labour has already won. Now the true question is what the opposition is going to look like. Now, whether Reform is the true opposition, I'm not quite sure yet. Of course, we've got our voting system doesn't allow for smaller parties to come through, but they are a big threat to the Conservative Party. And we heard Penny Mordaunt not replying to the question, will you accept Nigel Farage into the Conservatives? And we heard Suella Braverman, former Home Secretary, saying that actually it would be in the Tories' interest to do a deal with Nigel Farage and possibly offering something, and maybe they should have done that sooner.
And the reason, obviously, Nigel Farage is gaining a lot of traction, like him or loathe him, is that a lot of people think that he's quite an ordinary chap and he does answer straight questions with straight answers. A lot of politicians try and duck around the subject. Nigel Farage last night saying that he always tells the truth, got a few laughs. I think we can have a look at that clip now.
Neither of them will do anything. These people have lied to us repeatedly. And Labour, repeatedly. I know I've actually always told the truth.
Nigel Farage there saying that he's always told the truth, got a few laughs. Now, Penny Mordaunt seemed to close the door on any sort of pact with Farage, definitely this side of the election, but also after. The right does seem a bit fractured at the moment. Do you think there could be some coming together after the election, or are they going to stay very much in silos, the Tory and Reform in different camps?
Well, it really depends who's going to hold their seats, because people like Suella Braverman or Kemi Badenoch could potentially become a leader of the Conservative Party after this. We know that Penny would probably quite like to, but she might not be an MP after July the 4th, so who knows. In terms of what the right is going to look like, there is this assumption that the Conservative Party is going to go further to the right after the election. Having said that, lots of the Tories are going to potentially keep their seats actually in the blue wall, so One Nation Tories. So I'm not quite sure about that yet.
Lots of these smaller parties that ended up in this seven-way debate seem to be especially turning their guns on Angela Rayner last night, saying that this election seems to be a foregone conclusion. And so what they were doing is really trying to hammer Labour on their plans. We had the SNP, Plaid Cymru, the Greens, all saying that Labour's plans are too timid. I think the Greens really sort of punched a bruise with Angela Rayner, saying, look at all of these bold pledges that you and Keir Starmer made a few years ago, and now in an election campaign, you've ditched lots of them. Let's have a look at that.
Angela, which of your party's U-turns are you most proud of? The ditching of the £28 billion climate investment plan, keeping the cruel two-child benefit cap, or one of the others?
What I'm not proud of is that we've had 14 years of the Tories and the crashing of the economy, but what I am realistic about is we've got to have a programme for government which is credible, that can grow our economy.
Don't really feel like that answered my question.
What do you think, Martina? Did she answer the question?
No, of course she didn't. And so I liked, you mentioned the word timid, because I think the Green leader last night was talking about wealth taxes, and she asked Angela Rayner, why are you being so timid? And Angela Rayner replied, look, I've never been timid my entire life,
yes.
So you can't accuse me of doing that. But no, they're not answering, the Labour is not answering any questions. They are playing the safety card first. They're so close to the polls. We're going to go through their manifesto in a bit, I'm sure, but, they're hoping. No when he's going to talk about this manifesto in a couple of days' time.
Yes, in fact, Angela Rayner very keen to sort of look back at the past 14 years of Tory record, which Penny Mordaunt last night was tasked with defending. It's very difficult, isn't it, when you have a politician or a party who's been in power for so long, because they've got so much to defend. And I think that we can have a look at Angela Rayner last night really trying to hammer Penny Mordaunt over the Tory record.
We've got to make sure
years to come up with some ideas on this, and we have. We've got to. We'll be able to cap the visas.
It is absolute rubbish. You've had
talk about the issues that the questioner put.
And net migration has gone up.
You have no idea. You have no workforce strategy. You have no industrial strategy. You have no.
Are you talking to me or Rishi?
The Tory party, since 2010, have been very good at rebranding, ruthlessly so, to win elections. Can they do it this time? Can they sort of almost break from the past 14 years? Or can they actually use that to their advantage? Can they point to things which they might have done well and use that as a way to woo voters over?
Well, I think the problem that Rishi Sunak has had is he's tried so many rebrandings, but he hasn't focused on a single strategy. So he's trying to, he's hemorrhaging votes in the blue wall, hemorrhaging votes in the red wall, but hasn't got this one strategy that he can follow. In terms of can they do anything? I'm not entirely sure they can. That's $1 million question, isn't it?
It is indeed. And one thing they would have thought would change the dial this week is manifestos. It's been Manifesto week. You've been here, there and everywhere. I think we can see some of them today. We've got the Conservative Party manifesto and the Labour manifesto. You were in Manchester yesterday for the launch of Keir Starmer's pamphlet. This is obviously a massive moment in which they try and set out their stall to voters. Do you think he succeeded yesterday?
I think he has succeeded. He was very upbeat. He was in quite a very nice venue, the Co-op headquarters in Manchester, and I thought it was quite smart in terms of this venue's got so many floors upstairs, so there were lots of employees standing up, looking down at Sir Keir Starmer, and I thought that looked quite nice.
Almost like an amphitheatre or a coliseum.
Exactly. So he looked very nice. I think he was pleased. I followed him after for a couple of visits on the Labour battle bus, and he was very upbeat. He was pleased with how it went. Again, what I said earlier in terms of the other questions about how he's going to deliver that plan to rebuild Britain. Yes, there are many questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty meaty document. There's no surprises in there, nothing we really didn't know already. I think a lot of people now are suggesting what isn't in that document. And there's obviously very cast iron pledges not to put up national insurance, income tax and VAT. What's not in there is anything to do with capital gains tax or fuel duty or any council tax shake-up. Is that scrutiny now going to build in the final 3 weeks of the campaign about what Labour would do with other tax measures which they haven't put in this book?
Of course it is, but I think what we're going to get from them is the answer we heard from Angela Rayner last night and the answer we heard from Keir Starmer in the last few weeks, and that's going to be growth. Because every single time someone put a question to him about how are you going to prevent public spending cuts, how are you going to prevent putting tax rises, his answer was we're going to have to grow the economy. But he's not saying how much we need to grow the economy by to avoid those spending cuts, which are coming because the Tory government has already said that they are coming. So there's nothing about U-turning on those. And I thought it was quite interesting. They're betting everything on growth.
Yeah, and obviously, not a huge amount in there we didn't already know. In contrast, the Conservative manifesto, a bit bigger in its size than the Labour one. If you can cast your mind back, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, wasn't it? I can't remember. All the days blur into one in this campaign. But the Tories launched their manifesto. On the contrast, it was a pretty radical document. Tax cuts left, right and centre. Obviously, we had the national service, big welfare shake-up. Has that shifted the dial for Rishi Sunak at all?
It hasn't. I don't think it has. And we were talking about the record and how the Conservatives want to look at the future. But of course, Labour is very keen on talking about the last 14 years. And the problem is, how credible are they when they're talking about tax cuts when we know that we've got the highest tax burden in history over the last 70 years? Are voters going to believe them? And that's the line that Keir Starmer wants to remind voters, because he's saying, I've got no surprises in my manifesto. If you look at the Conservatives, obviously I haven't got this big policy announcements, but I'm doing that on purpose because I don't want overpromise and underdeliver, which is what you're getting with the Conservative Party.
Yeah, and that is the hard task ahead. Thank you very much, Martina. That's fantastic. And remember, you can watch the leaders, RISHI Sunak and Keir Starmer, meet Sun readers on our very own debate, Never Mind the Ballot, Election Showdown on Monday, the 24th of June on the Sun website and our YouTube channel. And joining me down the line now is Labour's Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. Wes, thanks for joining us this morning. How are you?
Well, I've just come from Good Morning Britain, where, according to my parents, I look tired.
Oh, I don't think you look tired. I think you look fresh-faced and full of stamina. And why wouldn't you? Because, even Tory politicians now are saying that Labour are well on their way to a huge majority. The polls haven't really shifted in the last year. It looks like you're going to cruise into Downing Street. And, a big majority is probably what you want, isn't it?
I know, so I've been campaigning all over the country, that there are millions of undecided voters out there. Postal votes are going to be arriving from the next week. And I'm still finding people on the doorstep who are saying, I'm not sure who I'm going to vote for. So we're not taking anything for granted in this election campaign. We're working hard for every vote. And I think one of the reasons why the Tories have cynically switched into this expectation management game is they're hoping that people think, oh, well, a Labour government is nailed on. There's no point in me going out to vote because we're already going to get change. Or I'm going to flirt with some of the smaller parties and cast my vote there because Labour's going to get the Tories out anyway. There's nothing inevitable about the outcome of this election. We will only get change if people vote for it. And I hope that now we've set out our manifestos, people can compare Labour's plan, an optimistic, hopeful plan for the future that is also fully costed, fully funded, promises we can keep and the country can afford, with Rishi Sunak's spending splurge, tens of billions of pounds of borrowing that would be like Liz Truss's mini budget on steroids. That's the kind of economic vandalism we'll see if they get back in. Letting the Tories back will be a bit like giving the matches back to the arsonist to finish the job. We definitely don't want that to happen, but we'll only get the change with a Labour government if people vote for it, and I hope they will on July the 4th.
But Wes Streeting, to put forward a proper ambitious plan for government, as you say you do in that manifesto, surely you want a landslide victory on July the 4th, because then you can be as radical as you want to be, rather than just having a small majority in which your hands might be tied. Surely you want to get as many seats as possible and, clean up across the country.
We definitely want a mandate for the change in our manifesto, but I can tell you that, whether our majority was a working majority or a majority that was more like Tony Blair's, we will deliver the plan in our manifesto and we will deliver the change that the country needs, but also the change the country can afford. We're being very upfront with people about the hard choices that we face. I think, therefore, it is important that we have a mandate to make those hard choices, to make sure that we can invest in our schools, our police, in cutting NHS waiting lists in the way that we spelled out in our manifesto, but crucially making sure that we deliver the stability, the investment and the economic reform that's needed to get Britain back to growth. Because if the economy was growing under the Conservatives as fast as it did under the last Labour government, there'd be tens of billions of pounds available to either give to people back in their pockets through tax cuts or to invest in our public services without having to hike up taxes on anyone. And it's because we've got this low growth economy under the Conservatives, we've ended up with a high tax economy, the highest tax burden in 70 years. And we know people are struggling with that. And that's why we've ruled out increases in income tax, national insurance and VAT. And every promise in our manifesto is a promise we will keep and a promise the country can afford.
Let's have a look at that manifesto. I've got it here in front of me. You were up in Manchester yesterday. It's a pretty meaty document.
I've got my own here too.
Fantastic. There we go. Snap.
Signed by every member of the Shadow Cabinet. Look at that. That's lovely.
Oh, my goodness me. What is that? Are you going to auction that off, are you? You're going to flog that for millions of pounds?
No, I'm going to keep that on my shelf.
Very good. Well, anyway, let's have a look at it.
Long time.
Let's have a look at tax. You mentioned tax, and like you said, there are clear commitments in black and white not to raise the rates of income tax, national insurance or VAT across the next 5 years. What people are now saying is what is not in that manifesto. There's nothing on capital gains tax, fuel duty, a council tax shake-up. And yesterday, Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner seemed unable to say that these wouldn't rise. Can you be the Labour politician that finally clears this up? What's going to happen with those three taxes?
Well, the reassurance I can give people is there is nothing in this manifesto that requires those taxes to rise. And people can also, I think, judge Rachel Reeves on her record. As Shadow Chancellor, she has made the case and prosecuted the Tories over the fact that they have sent the tax burden rising and rising and rising, and she wants to bring it down. And when it comes to things like the Sun's long-standing campaign on fuel duty, she has always backed those campaigns because she knows that motorists are really suffering at the pump at the moment in terms of prices. So that tells you the kind of Chancellor Rachel Reeves would be, someone who understands the pain people are feeling in people's pockets, who is unhappy and uncomfortable with the tax burden being as high as it is, and someone who, even in this manifesto, I mean, people can look, she hasn't even allowed the shadow cabinet to spend all of the money that she has identified through closing down on tax avoidance and closing some of the tax loopholes, because she's kept money aside in the manifesto to be prepared for some of the nasty surprises that will no doubt await us if we win the next general election. That tells you something about Rachel Reeves' character, her caution, her prudence. She's a former economist at the Bank of England. She knows what she's talking about. She is going to be a responsible Chancellor if people give us the mandate on July the 4th.
Yeah, but Wes, you've been around politics a fairly long time, and you know that if you don't give a cast-iron guarantee of something, it opens the door for possible tax rises in the future. And are we not leading up to a fact after the election in Rachel Reeves' first budget where she looks at the books and says the economy is down the pan, and now we need some serious revenue raises to be able to get it, to be able to close that black hole? Are we not seeing now the sort of the slow motion build-up of taxes and fuel duty, taxes on capital gains tax? Is that not what we're leading to? Because it hasn't been properly ruled out, has it?
I don't think so. I've worked closely with Rachel Reeves for years now in terms of the investment and the reform that's needed, particularly in terms of our NHS. And Rachel Reeves has been even more tough with the shadow cabinet in private than she has been in public, because she knows that the central task of the next Labour government has got to be to get back to growth, that we can't tax and spend our way out of this economic crisis. And that's why, I mean, I've been very proud of Rachel's leadership on this, backed by, actually, to be fair, the rest of the shadow cabinet as well, where she has said to people directly, you can't just spend your way out of this crisis. I want to see plans from you to reform. And that's part of our plans as well. You know, people can see in our manifesto that, as well as some of the fairer ways in which we will raise money for vital investment, like cutting NHS waiting lists with 40,000 more appointments or 13,000 more police on our streets, she's also got the shadow cabinet to identify things that we would reform or things that we would cut, like, you know, halving the spending on management consultants, for example, making sure that we reform the way the police do their contracting to save money there. Scrapping the A27 bypass, deferring that so that we can put money into our roads and fill 1 million more potholes every year. You know, she's been disciplined with the shadow cabinet, and she's built discipline across Labour's team.
Wes.
And that's one of the reasons I think she will be, if she's given the chance, one of the most successful chancellors this country's ever had.
Wes Streeting, Rachel Reeves has been very clear that she doesn't want to put taxes up on working people. Obviously, you mentioned fuel duty earlier on. Millions of people use petrol, go in their cars, go in their vans and get to work. Is that a tax which we can categorise under the working people category, and therefore can assume that Rachel Reeves is not going to be keen to put that up?
Well, you've seen the support that Rachel's given the Sun year after year when you've run this campaign. And one thing I can predict with absolute certainty is that when Rachel Reeves announces the date of her first budget, if we win the next general election, the Sun will run that campaign again, as you always do. And you've got a pretty good track record of success, and Rachel Reeves has got a pretty good track record of backing your campaign. So without wanting to speak for Rachel or write her budgets for her, I think Rachel has shown time and again that she understands the pressures on motorists and the pressures of the prices at the pumps. I know that as a motorist myself. So does Rachel. So look, I think you'll be pushing an open door.
Fantastic. A 14 years victory, hopefully 15 years plus we can get it. I was up in Grimsby earlier on this week. Keir Starmer doing the leaders' debate. Something that came up was a question of trust. He got a pretty rough ride in Grimsby, as did RISHI Sunak, obviously. It was a pretty tough audience. One of the things which he was asked about was his support for Jeremy Corbyn in the past few years. You refused to serve under Jeremy Corbyn. Are you more principled than Keir Starmer?
I don't think so. I think we were wrestling with the same moral dilemma. And let's not forget that Keir Starmer was one of the vast majority of Labour MPs who voted no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn. Keir Starmer resigned from Jeremy Corbyn's front bench. And then when Jeremy Corbyn was re-elected, we all faced a terrible dilemma about how to avoid the Labour Party becoming extinct. And what people like Keir Starmer, Tom Watson, and a small number of members of the Shadow Cabinet did was to try and prevent the Labour Party from literally falling off a political cliff and becoming destroyed and no longer existing as a political force, which is where people genuinely thought we might end up. And then after 2019, what Keir Starmer has done is to fundamentally change the Labour Party. I think he has shown real steel, tough leadership. And the proof of the pudding is the fact that Jeremy Corbyn is not only no longer a Labour MP, he's been expelled from the Labour Party, is standing against the Labour Party at the next general election. I think that is proof of the change that Keir Starmer has led. And frankly, after the 2019 general election, I wondered if Labour would ever win again. I wondered if we could ever be a force for good in this country again. And till my dying day, I will be grateful for the leadership that Keir Starmer has shown, because yes, the Tories and the SNP and their problems have put wind in Labour's sails, no doubt about that. But the only reason we have sails on our ship and the Labour Party is shipshape is because of the leadership of the captain, because of the leadership that Keir has shown. He has shown he can make tough decisions. He has shown he has changed the Labour Party. And with the permission of the voters, he can change our country for the better too.
Well, the wind is certainly in your sails, to continue that analogy. Can I just take you on to something which you talked about on Never Mind the Ballots before, and I know you care about, which is the issue of gender. I noticed in the manifesto you are going to take out gender recognition certificates from a sort of independent panel of experts and put it into sort of more your area with GPs signing it off. Some campaigners say that this would be a sort of almost a backdoor towards self-ID, because lots of GPs are tied up with staff and they might just sign it off willy-nilly. What do you say to those campaigners that say you're just bringing in self-ID by the back door, and couldn't you rule out any such move?
Firstly, Jack, I've made no bones about the fact that I don't think self-ID can work effectively in law. There is too great a risk of laws that are designed to ensure the inclusion, the respect, the dignity of trans people could be abused by people who are either taking the mick or people who've got more sinister aims. And I think particularly of that terrible case up in Scotland of Isla Bryson. I mean, that is proof of what happens when laws designed only with good intentions and without looking properly at mitigating against the risk of perpetrators of male violence against women abusing those laws. That's why we've got to have a robust system in place, and that's why that's the commitment that Labour has made in our manifesto at this general election. I want us to have a better conversation about this as a country. I want trans people to feel safe, to feel included, to feel respected. I also want women to know with certainty that their rights, their voices, and their spaces will be protected too. And I feel so confident that we can find a way through what has been a toxic conversation in a much more thoughtful, open-minded and good-natured way that tries to heal divisions rather than exploit them for political ends. And I think that's the approach we're taking in our manifesto. And I hope we can build that national consensus we need.
Wes, is it safe to assume that any Labour government in Westminster would continue to block any Scottish Government proposals to propose self-ID as they tried to last year? Would that be the constant under the Labour government as well?
Yeah, the law is the law, and we're not planning to change that. And the other thing I'd say is I think Scottish politicians will probably be reflecting on the gender recognition debacle there as well, and trying to take a step back and think about how we get what has been a thorny issue, making sure we get it right, and we try and bring people together and heal divisions.
Just quickly, Wes, you've got a warning today that spiralling mental health bill will cost £115 billion to taxpayers over the next Parliament if the Tories stay in. What will that number be at the end of a Labour 5-year term? What's the bill going to be at the end of that?
Well, we want to bring that down significantly with 8,500 extra mental health workers to cut the waiting list that currently stand at more than 1 million. We're going to put mental health support in every primary and secondary school in the country so that young people's mental health and well-being is better served and they don't reach crisis. And we're going to have community mental health hubs in every community. I'm currently speaking to you up in Wakefield, where there's a brilliant initiative through Trinity Rugby Club, which is bringing together, working with organisations like Movember, a brilliant community-based service, particularly around men's mental health. I want to see more of this kind of thing. We've got to bring the economic bill of ill health down. We can do that by getting people off waiting lists and back to health, because often off waiting lists and back to health also means off waiting lists and back to work as well. So it's better for everyone, better for our health, better for our economy.
Thank you very much, Wes. I know you're very busy on the campaign trail, but are you going to be watching the England team at the weekend take on Serbia in the Euros?
I will. The plan is a pub lunch for Father's Day with my dad, and then I'm going to watch the game with my dad, probably at home or down the pub, at the same time as I continue with my quest to persuade my lifelong Tory voting dad to switch to Labour at this general election. He's already telling me that he's planning to vote tactically at this election, and increasingly that looks like his vote is going to go for Labour. But as
you
with
haven't
every
won
other
over your
vote in the
dad
country,
yet after 5 years.
Listen, Jack, I've got to tell you, my dad and my granddad, they have been lifelong Tories. Where I've got him to is a massive achievement, like lots of other millions of former lifelong Tory voters. But as with them, I'm not taking my dad's vote for granted. I'm going to be working to persuade him right up till he puts that cross in the box.
Well, good luck with that. Wes Streeting, thank you so much for joining us.
Cheers, Jack.
And let's cross to southern Italy now, where our sun-kissed political editor, Harry Cole, spent the past few days topping up his tan down at the G7. Harry, you write in your column in today's paper that Rishi Sunak looks like a bit of a broken man. Is he ready to throw in the towel?
I don't think he's ready to throw the towel just yet, Jack. We've actually just had breakfast with the Prime Minister, where he has responded to that pretty shocking poll overnight for the Tories that shows him in third place behind Reform. He has branded that a blank cheque to Labour. He said that poll would allow them to tax your home, your pension, your car, your family. He was actually a bit more fighting spirited this morning. I think he may have read my column because he came a little bit more pumped up. I think he's going to have a big announcement on migration this evening, which he seems quite excited about. But you're right, he has been down in the dumps for the last few days and weeks, really. I mean, ever since that D-Day debacle, he's looked pretty po-faced. He wasn't particularly good in the Sky News debate on Wednesday night, which I'm sure you'll talk about with Martina in a moment. But he really does need to buck up because there's still 3 weeks to go. As he says, they're only halfway through. And he's now, he's fighting on two fronts now. On the right, he's fighting Reform. On the left, he's fighting Labour.
And do you think that pretty shock poll last night showing Reform just 1 point ahead of Rishi Sunak, according to YouGov, is that the wake-up call that he needs to really sort of buck up now and go into the last 3 weeks of campaigning with a bit of spring in his step?
You would hope so. Well, Tory MPs would be hoping so. I think the nation will be hoping so because, at this rate, then, if you look at that poll, that is an existential event for the Conservative Party. And that's just, leaving aside your party political allegiances, if you have any, that's bad for the country. A Labour supermajority, as the Tories have been warning of, it's not just a sort of political point, but party political point. It is, good law and good governance comes from, our Westminster system being fair and having a functioning opposition. And Reform on 18%, I personally think that's probably a little high because the methodology that YouGov use versus other pollsters, would be wipeout territory for the government. And, looking at Keir Starmer with a majority bigger even that of, say, Tony Blair's.
And Harry, obviously, he's leading an election campaign, but he's still got his prime ministerial duties out at the G7 on the world stage. What have been the main talking points of this summit?
Well, Zelensky was here yesterday. A big package of support for Ukraine. Actually, a really interesting way they've funded this now. £50 billion of loans to Ukraine, which is loans from G7 countries directly to Ukraine, but underwritten by the fact that the G7 countries are going to be able to claw that money back from the interest it's sitting on the seized Russian bank assets. So there's billions and billions of pounds of seized Russian assets. They're not nicking those assets, not taking those, but they're taking the interest that's being accrued in those frozen bank accounts, handing it directly to Ukraine for rebuilding. Also, last night, awkward moment with President Biden, where he was looking very doddery. He was wandering around. He sort of wandered off, and Giorgia Meloni, the Italian premier, had to sort of guide him back to the crowd. It was quite painful viewing. Everyone's putting a slight brave face on it this morning. We've got some more for that for the paper tomorrow. But yeah, you can see from that footage yourself. It's this is getting embarrassing now. And you do really wonder how President Biden is going to be able to run an election campaign in October and November for re-election. And if he won, is that a man he really thinks is going to get through the next 4 years?
I mean, you're right. It was absolutely painful to watch, and that clip's going viral currently on social media. Obviously, Donald Trump and the Republicans really looking to ham it up. I mean, what was going on? I mean, obviously, most G7 summits are diplomatic sprints. You expect to see the President of the United States, as other world leaders, doing a flurry of meetings. Has he been doing the same thing?
No, he ducked out of the dinner last night, and frankly, Jack, I'm gonna ruin my story for the paper tomorrow by telling it to never mind the ballots. But my sources, diplomatic sources here, people I've been speaking to, say it's the worst they've ever seen Joe Biden. Wow. And he's in a bad way, and he's losing focus in meetings. Sometimes he's very sharp, sometimes he's very much not. So some worrying developments there, and an exclusive news story to never mind the ballots. I've got to go now because they're going to put us on a bus. But I look forward to reading that one on the Sun website very shortly.
Harry, thank you so much, as always, and we'll see you when you're back in Blighty in a couple of days' time. All right, and thank you to Martina Bett, Wes Streeting, of course, and Harry Cole for joining me today. This was Never Mind the Ballot Election Countdown. Remember to subscribe to us on youtube.com/@sunelection to watch more.